There is a difference between being believed and being vindicated. Being believed feels like relief. Being vindicated feels like standing in a parking lot watching a building you used to live in catch fire and understanding that you are safe, and that the fire is just, and that none of that stops it from being a fire. I have been vindicated. I want to be honest about what that feels like before I tell you what it took to get there. Because this kind of story gets told as a triumph, and I don't think triumph is the right word. The right word is something more complicated, something that sits in the chest like a stone that's finally the right temperature. Not warm, not cold, just present, just real. My name is Marcus Yun. I am 24 years old. My father's a man named Daniel Ewan, who built a reputation in our city over 30 years with careful and deliberate attention, the way you build anything you intend to keep. He was respected. He was admired. He was, in the language of the community that knew him, a good man. I knew things about him that the community did not know. When I was 19, I said some of those things out loud. He disowned me the following week. By phone. 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I know the length because my phone logged it and I looked at the log afterward, once, trying to understand how long it takes to end a family. 4 minutes and 40 seconds. The things I said out loud came back, 5 years later, from a direction neither of us had anticipated. And they did what truth does when it has been suppressed long enough. It does not arrive quietly. It arrives with the accumulated pressure of everything that was done to keep it down. Before I take you into any of that, hit like and subscribe. It matters more than I know how to say. Drop your city and your time in the comments. I read every one. Let me take you back. Part 1. The man he was in public. My father was the kind of man who got introduced at events. You know the type. The person the MC mentions by name before the program starts, whose presence is treated as a credential for the gathering itself. He had built a mid-sized construction and property development firm over 30 years, starting with 2 employees and a truck, and ending with 60 staff and a portfolio that included commercial properties, residential developments, and a civic center that bore a small plaque with his company's name on it in the lobby. He gave to charities. He sat on boards. He coached youth basketball for 7 years when I was growing up, which meant every Saturday morning I watched my father be the best version of himself for other people's children while I sat on the bleachers and did homework. I want to be fair. He was not a bad father in every way. He was present. He came to things. He had opinions about my education and invested in them financially and in time. He taught me to drive in an empty parking lot on a Sunday morning, patiently, with a coffee in one hand and a calm he did not always have. But there was a version of my father that existed inside our house that did not match the version the community saw. Not in obvious ways. Not in ways I could have explained clearly at 10 or 12 or 15. In texture. In temperature. In the specific quality of the silence after my mother said something he didn't agree with, which was a silence I learned to read the way sailors read weather. My mother's name is Helen. She is a precise, intelligent woman who became, over the course of 22 years of marriage, smaller. Not physically. In the way she took up space. In the way she prefaced her opinions. In the way she looked at her plate during conversations she had decided not to enter. I watched my mother become smaller for as long as I can remember. I did not have language for what I was watching until I was older. Children don't have language for the climate of their house, they just breathe it. Part 2. What I grew up knowing by the time I was 15, I understood several things. I understood that my father's anger, when it came, did not come loudly, it came cold. A withdrawal of warmth, abrupt and total, like a light switching off. It could last hours or days depending on the trigger. During these periods, my mother became very busy, very efficient, very focused on logistics, dinner, schedules, tasks, and very absent from anything that required her to be still. I understood that my father's public generosity and his private accounting were not the same. He tracked everything inside the house. Not money specifically, though money was part of it. Attention, gratitude. Whether you had thanked him correctly for the correct things, whether your appreciation was proportional to what had been provided. He kept these tallies in a way he never stated explicitly, but which shaped every interaction. You always owed something. The debt was never named and therefore never paid. I understood that when I was 14 and my mother had a car accident, minor, no injuries, a wet road, and a telephone pole. And my father did not speak to her for 9 days. What was happening was not grief or shock or a husband processing fear. I understood this because I was 14 and I watched carefully, and what I saw in my father during those 9 days was not a man frightened for someone he loved. It was a man administering a consequence. I understood all of this, and I did nothing with any of it, because I was a child in that house, and there was nothing a child could do. And also because I loved my father, which is the most complicated sentence in this entire story, and I will not pretend otherwise. I loved him, I watched him, I understood things I could not say. I grew up. Part 3. The summer I was 19. I came home from my first year of college in May. I had studied away from home intentionally, a university 4 hours from our city, far enough that I could breathe differently. I came home for the summer because my mother asked me to, and because underneath the asking was something I had learned to hear over years of listening carefully, a frequency beneath the words that said, "I need you here." I came home and I found my mother quieter than she had been the previous September, not in a new way, in an accelerated way, like a process that had been running slowly for years had recently picked up speed. I want to be specific, without being more specific than I have the right to be, because this is my story, but it is also hers, and she has not given me permission to tell all of it, and I will honor that. What I will say is this. In July of that summer, I saw something. I was in the house and I saw something happen between my parents, and I understood, in the way you understand things that you have always half known when they are finally fully visible, what the texture of my childhood had been made of. I stood in a hallway of my parents' house, and I understood. I did not go to my father that night. I went to my room. I lay on my bed. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about my mother at the kitchen table, looking at her plate. I thought about 9 days of silence after a wet road and a telephone pole. I thought about the way she prefaced her opinions. I thought about the word smaller. I thought, someone needs to say something. I thought, nobody in this house is ever going to say something. I thought, I'm the only one here who can leave afterward. Part 4. What I said, I want to be careful here too. Not because I am ashamed of what I said, I am not. Because accuracy matters, and I do not want to overstate or understate the moment. I did not confront my father in the hallway that night. I waited 2 weeks. I thought about what I was going to say. I considered whether to say it at all, what it would cost, whether saying it would help, or whether it would simply satisfy something in me, while changing nothing for my mother. I concluded that silence was a form of participation, that by being in that house and knowing what I knew, and saying nothing, I was becoming part of the architecture that kept everything in place. I asked my father to sit down with me one morning in August. My mother was not home. We sat at the kitchen table. He had a coffee. I had water. He had the expression of a man who was prepared to be reasonable. I told him what I had seen in July. I told him what I had understood. I told him that what happened in our house between him and my mother was not acceptable, that it had not been acceptable for as long as I had been alive, and that I was saying so because someone had to, and because I loved him, and because I believed that a person could be told the truth by someone who loved them, and could choose to do something with it. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he set his coffee down. He looked at me across the kitchen table where we had eaten 10,000 meals. He said, "You don't know what you're talking about." I said, "I know what I saw." He said, "You saw one moment in a marriage you're not part of, and you've decided you understand 30 years. I said, "I've been in this house for 18 years. I've understood more than you know." He said, "You're a child." I said, "I'm 19. He said, "19 is a child who thinks he isn't." The conversation lasted about 20 minutes. He did not raise his voice. His voice, the whole time, had the quality of something controlled precisely because releasing it would reveal something. At the end, he stood up. He said, This conversation is over. You should go back to school. I said, Dad. I'm saying this because I love you, and I'm worried about Mom. He said, Your mother is fine. Your mother is my wife, and our relationship is not your concern. I said, It has been my concern my entire life. He left the room. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the window above the sink. I looked at the chair where my mother looked at her plate. I went back to school in September. He called me the following week. 4 minutes and 40 seconds. He said I had disrespected him in his own house. He said I had leveled accusations without evidence. He said I had broken something that he was not sure could be repaired. He said until I was prepared to apologize for what I had said and retract it, I was not welcome in the family home, and that he was putting in writing that I was not his dependent, and that my college costs beyond what was already paid for that semester would not be his responsibility. He said the word disowned once. Once was enough. I did not apologize. I did not retract. I hung up, and I sat in my dorm room for a while, and I thought about what I had said. Whether I believed it, whether I had been right to say it. I believed it. I had been right to say it. I also understood that being right was not going to feel the way I had imagined it feeling. It was going to feel like this, like a dorm room, like a phone call log that said 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Part 5. The years between. There are 4 years between the phone call and what happened next, and I am going to tell them to you honestly, which means telling you that they were not a straight line toward anything. I finished college on loans and a part-time job and a scholarship I applied for in the desperate focused way of someone whose options have been clarified by necessity. My mother called me every few weeks. We talked around the edges of things. She did not leave my father. I had known she might not, and I had said what I said anyway, not because I expected it to produce a specific outcome, but because silence was no longer something I could maintain. She told me once, about a year after the phone call, that she had been to see someone, a counselor. She said it quietly, the way you say something when you're not sure whether saying it will be safe. I said I was glad. She said she was too. We did not talk about my father. My father and I did not speak. Holidays happened without me. I spent Thanksgivings with my college roommate's family, who were loud and Italian, and argued about football and gave me a plate of food without any ceremony at all, which was the best thing that could have happened. I graduated. I got a job at a non-profit communications work, writing, the thing I had turned out to be good at, largely because I had spent my childhood reading subtext and translation, comes naturally when you've had to read a room your entire life. I was good at the work. I got better. I moved to a city 3 hours from home and built a life that was mine in every room and every morning. And I will not pretend that this was not its own form of relief so large, I sometimes woke up surprised by it. My father's name still appeared in the news. Local business coverage. A new development. A board appointment. A charitable contribution. I read these items the way you read dispatches from a country you used to live in, with recognition and a certain careful distance. I had told the truth. The truth had not, as far as I could see, done anything. My father continued as he had always been. The building continued to stand. I had put my hand on the structure, and it had not moved, and I had walked away changed, and the structure had not. That is sometimes what truth does. I had accepted that. I had accepted that. And then it didn't. Part 6. The direction. Nobody anticipated. I am going to be careful here. Not for my father's sake. For the sake of accuracy, and for the sake of several people whose stories are not mine to tell in full. What I will tell you is the shape of it. 2 years ago a woman came forward. She had worked at my father's company for 6 years. She had a specific account of specific things. She gave this account first to an attorney, then to a second woman who came forward separately, then to a third. 3 women. A pattern. A pattern documented by 3 independent accounts that had never compared notes because none of them had known the others existed. The accounts were given to an investigative reporter at a publication in our city. The reporter spent 4 months verifying. She interviewed 11 people. She reviewed records. She was thorough in the way that matters. Not fast, not dramatic. Thorough. The article ran on a Thursday morning in October. I read it in my apartment in the city 3 hours from home. I sat at my kitchen table and I read it twice. It named specific behaviors in specific contexts. It used language that was measured and documented and careful. I had not spoken to these women. I had not known they existed. What I had seen in that hallway at 19, what I had named at the kitchen table, the thing I had been disowned for saying. It was not unique to my mother. It was not a private matter between a husband and a wife that an overreaching son had misunderstood. It was a pattern, documented, named, attributed. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after I finished reading. I did not feel vindicated, not in any clean way. I felt something more like the specific, exhausting grief of finding out that the thing you suspected was true, and that your suspecting it had not protected anyone else from it. The building was not standing anymore. And I was in a parking lot watching, and the fire was just, and it was still a fire. Part 7. What happened to him? The article created what such articles create when they are well reported and the pattern is documented, and the institution has the kind of reputation that makes the gap between public image and private truth land with particular force. His board positions were reviewed. 2 organizations requested his resignation. 1 did not, and was publicly criticized for not doing so, and reversed course within a week. A development project he had been negotiating for 18 months fell through when the municipal partner withdrew. His firm's largest commercial client issued a statement of concern, and then, 6 weeks later, did not renew its contract. His name still appeared in the news, differently. I tracked it from my apartment, not obsessively, with the attention of someone who needed to know what was happening without being inside it. My mother called me the week the article ran. She had already read it. She called me in the morning before I had thought about calling her, which told me something. She said, "Marcus?" I said, "I know." She said, "I want you to know I'm okay." I said, "Are you?" A pause. She said, I'm doing something about things I should have done something about sooner. I have been. For about a year." I said, "Mom." She said, "I know. I'm sorry it took as long as it took." I said, "It took as long as it had to take." She said, "You told the truth." I said, "So did they. They're the ones who, what happened because of them." I just said something in a kitchen. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You said it when no one else in his life was going to say it. Don't make that smaller than it was." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. Part 8. The apology that didn't come and the one that did. My father did not call me. I did not expect him to. I want to be honest about that expectation. It was not bitterness or resignation. It was knowledge. I knew my father well enough to know that a call from him would have required a capacity for the kind of reckoning that the entirety of his life had been organized to avoid. What came instead was a letter. Tight. Formal in the way of a legal document rather than a personal communication, which was itself a kind of information. It said he was in a process of reflection. It said he regretted how the conversation in August had concluded. It said he hoped I was well. It did not say I was right. It did not say he was sorry. It said he regretted how the conversation concluded, which is the language of a person acknowledging that an ending was unfortunate without accepting that anything before it was wrong. I read the letter once. I put it in a drawer. I have not written back, not out of cruelty. Out of the knowledge that I do not have anything to give to a person who, even now, cannot say the word sorry without wrapping it in procedure. I have spent enough of my life translating. I am not interested in translating anymore. The apology that mattered came from my mother. Not the phone call, though the phone call mattered. In person, when I drove back to the city in November, and she met me at a restaurant and we sat across from each other for the first time in almost 2 years. She looked different. Not older. More herself. Like a person who has been allowed to return to their actual dimensions after a long time in a smaller space. She said, "You were right. You were right at 19, and I knew it, and I couldn't say so, and I let him disown you." I have lived with that. I said, "I know." She said, "I'm not asking you to say it's okay." I said, It wasn't okay. She said, no. I said, and I'm here. And I want to figure out what this looks like now. She nodded. She looked at the table. She looked up. She said, I went back to the counselor. I've been going for a year. She says I'm doing the right things. I said, are you? She said, I feel like myself for the first time in I don't know how long. That feels like something. I said that feels like a lot. We ate dinner. We talked about things that were not my father. She told me about a class she'd enrolled in, something she'd always been curious about and had never had permission to pursue, which she now pursued without asking permission because there was no longer anyone whose permission shaped her days. She said this matter-of-factly. I did not make a thing of it. It was already the most important thing said all evening. Part 9. What it cost. Pause here with me. If you've ever told the truth in a room where the truth was not welcome and paid for it with something you couldn't get back, drop the word still in the comments. Because you're still here. And that matters? I want to tell you what it cost me, because this kind of story often skips to the vindication and lets you infer the cost from context. I don't want to let you infer it. I want to name it. It cost me 4 years of holiday tables that weren't mine. It cost me the version of my father that I would have kept if I had stayed quiet. The public version. The coaching version. The parking lot, driving lesson version. That version of him is gone, not because I spoke, but because I learned what he was made of, and you cannot unknow a thing once you know it. And the father I would have kept would have been an edited version I maintained, by not looking directly at him. It cost me a particular kind of easy, the easy of a kid whose family is intact and uncomplicated and who can call home without calculating. That easy was never really available to me, because the house was never really what it appeared to be, but I didn't know that, and not knowing has its own value, and now I know, and the not knowing is gone. It cost me something in the chest that I notice on certain mornings, not grief exactly, not regret, the weight of having been right and of right not being enough to protect everyone you would have protected if you could. Here is what it gave me. It gave me the knowledge that I can say a true thing in a room that doesn't want it and survive. That sounds small. It is not small. That knowledge has shaped every decision I have made in the 5 years since that kitchen table. Every job I took. Every relationship I entered. Every time someone powerful said something untrue, and I had to decide whether to say so. I say so. Every time now I say so. Because I learned at 19 that the cost of saying a true thing is survivable, and the cost of staying silent is something you carry in your body for years, and it is heavier than the other thing. I know because I carry both now, and I can feel the difference. Epilogue. The parking lot spring. A Saturday. My city, not my hometown. I'm at a coffee shop near my apartment, a place I like for its light and its lack of opinions about how long I stay. My mother and I talk every Sunday. Real conversations now, the kind where we both take up space. She is in a process I will not describe in detail because it is hers, but it is moving in the direction of her own life, which I observe from a careful and supportive distance. My father is in a process too. His firm still exists, reduced. His name still appears in print, differently. I believe he is in the kind of reckoning that a person enters when the distance between who they have claimed to be and who they are becomes publicly visible and cannot be managed by withdrawing warmth or administering silence. I do not know what that reckoning looks like from inside. I do not have access to his interior anymore. I find that I do not miss the access. I miss the father I believed existed when I was 10 and watching him coach Saturday basketball. I miss the parking lot, the Sunday morning, the coffee in one hand and the patience. Those things were real. They were not the whole of him, but they were real and they were mine. And missing them is allowed. Being vindicated did not make me stop missing them. That is what I most want you to hear. Vindication is not closure. Vindication is not the replacement of one feeling with another cleaner feeling. Vindication is simply the moment when the world catches up to what you already knew, and you stand in the parking lot and you watch, and you understand that the fire was necessary and you let yourself feel whatever you feel about fires. I told the truth. The truth was true before anyone else confirmed it. It was true in August in a kitchen to a man who called it nothing. That is the part that matters. Not the article. Not the board resignations. Not the letter that didn't say sorry. The kitchen. The August morning. A 19-year-old who decided that silence was a form of participation, and that he was done participation. That kid was right. He had no idea what it would cost. He said it anyway. That's the whole story. That's all of it. If you made it this far, thank you. Some of you have sat at a kitchen table and said a true thing to someone who didn't want it. Some of you are still deciding whether to. Drop one word in the comments. One word for what it took to say the true thing out loud. I read every comment. I answer the ones I can. There's another video linked below. It's about the conversation I finally had with my mother in that restaurant, and one specific thing she said that I have not stopped thinking about. You were not wrong. You were never wrong. See you there.